Buenos dias. Thank you. I'm delighted to join you at the second session of the forum in Washington, D.C., hosted by the Pan-American Foundation for Democracy and Cuba Decide in solidarity with this global alliance for Cuba's democracy. I want to take this opportunity to greet my colleagues in the United States and Europe and give a special welcome to the new members who have joined from Uruguay, Bolivia, Chile, and Costa Rica. I'll start by reiterating my commitment to the objectives of the Transatlantic Parliamentary Coalition for a Free Cuba, inaugurated in Miami on November 20th, 2021. Because defense of democracy and condemnation of oppression in Cuba and elsewhere is a global struggle that must transcend borders, ideologies, and political parties. Canada and all democratic nations have a moral duty to listen to the voices of the people of Cuba as expressed by hundreds of thousands of brave Cubans across the island who peacefully took to the streets on July 11th, 2021. Cubans on that occasion made clear their absolute rejection of the dictatorial communist system on the island and their desire to live in a democracy and freedom. They understood that the root of Cuba's social, economic, and political problems, the chronic shortage of food and medicine, the crumbling healthcare system, and the human rights catastrophe they face lay in the obsolete, repressive, exclusionary, and centralized economic policies of the Communist Party. Civil society fighting for democracy in Cuba is cornered by the regime's extensive surveillance and repression apparatus. Thousands of Cubans were arbitrarily arrested on July 11 and in subsequent days. Today, there are more than 1,000 political prisoners on the island, including women and children. So far in the first quarter of 2022, human rights NGOs have reported thousands of repressive action by the Cuban regime, including arbitrary arrests, harassment, fines, and forced expatriation. And now, in addition to existing repressive laws, the regime plans to implement a new penal code with even harsher penalties for political dissent. Meanwhile, impunity is rampant in Cuba, and none of the members of the repressive forces responsible for murders, beatings, and torture have been brought before Cuban courts. That is why the Transatlantic Parliamentary Coalition is so important. International solidarity is imperative for the triumph of democracy in Cuba. If we turn our backs on the Cuban people and do not show international solidarity, it is not possible for democracy to be reborn in Cuba. In Canada, I've been honored to work with the freedom-loving Cuban-Canadian community. In several meetings with them, I have noted how they are the best ambassadors of the people of Cuba in their struggle for democracy. Together with a community of freedom-loving Canadians of Cuban descent and important voices of solidarity from the Conservative Party parliamentarians, we have taken steps to make the main points of the Miami Declaration a reality. On March 24th, I was proud to table a motion in the Senate of Canada that introduces key points of the Miami Declaration. The motion denounces the legitimacy of Cuba's dictatorial regime, urges the government of Canada to support opposition groups on the island as valid interlocutors in Canada-Cuba relations, and calls on the Senate of Canada and the executive of our government to support the Cuban people's right to free expression and peaceful demonstration without any fear of reprisal. The motion was supported by the Conservative Party senators. Unfortunately, it is currently languishing on the order paper, awaiting action from a majority of Trudeau government-appointed parliamentarians. And along with other Conservative parliamentarians such as Pierre Poilievre and Mr. Pierre Paulus, we have taken part in public demonstrations organized by the Cuban community in support of democracy in Cuba. We have also been drawing attention to the moral and ethical implications of vacationing and investing money in Cuba and how it contributes to propping up the repressive apparatus used to persecute journalists, artists, human rights defenders, and critics of the regime. We believe that in the current global context and due to the close relationship of the Cuban regime as a key ally of dictator Vladimir Putin in Russia, vacationing and investing in Cuba is tantamount to giving support to a human rights predatory regime that, in addition to unleashing repression against its own people, uses all its state-controlled media on the island to reproduce the Kremlin's disinformation machine on the invasion of Ukraine. Canada cannot forget that regimes in countries such as Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua are involved in the axis of aggression against Ukraine. Canada must be consistent in its defense of human rights and democracy around the world, and in the same manner it condemns repression in Venezuela, Belarus, Iran, Zimbabwe, and sanctions corrupt officials and human rights abusers in 21 countries, it should do the same with the Cuban regime. I urge the Trudeau government to stand on the side of the Cuban people, and during the celebration of the 9th Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles next June, to publicly call on the Cuban regime to immediately cease the use of politically motivated repression against their own people. This process requires more than just a few occasional statements by a prime minister. It involves actively working for democratic change through parliamentary resolutions, bills, sanctions against human rights violators in Cuba, and actions to stop the financial flow from Canada to Cuba that serves to strengthen the repressive apparatus of the Cuban dictatorship. I encourage all members of the Transatlantic Parliamentary Coalition in the Americas and Europe to strengthen this alliance for Cuba's democracy through bills and resolutions and other actions. Let us reiterate our commitment to continue raising our voices in legislative chambers, influencing the executive branches and government institutions in all our respective nations, so they may denounce the oppression of the Cuban people, refrain from making unilateral concessions to the regime, demand the release of all Cuban political prisoners, and call on the international community to defend unequivocally human rights in Cuba. Patria y vida, long live free Cuba. Thank you so much.